The morning sun cast long shadows across Mike's gas and go as 9-year-old Peggy Thompson carefully counted quarters from her small unicorn purse. Her German shepherd, Max, sat alertly beside her, his amber eyes never leaving his young owner. The peaceful moment shattered as the thunderous roar of motorcycles filled the air. 15 motorcycles surrounded them, chrome gleaming under the morning light. A hulking man with a scarred face dismounted, his leather vest emblazoned with a viper curling around a skull. The other customers scattered inside, leaving the small girl and her dog alone on the concrete island. "Well, what do we have here?" The man called Havoc sneered, his voice carrying across the lot. "Little girl out walking her puppy?" Max's posture changed instantly, ears forward, muscles tense. The dog didn't bark or growl, but something in his stillness made several bikers step back. Havoc's hand shot out, gripping Peggy's small arm with bruising force. "In our town, little girls pay a toll." What happened next seemed to unfold in slow motion. Peggy didn't scream or struggle. Instead, she made a subtle gesture with her free hand, 3 fingers extended, then curled inward. The transformation in Max was immediate and terrifying. The German shepherd didn't lunge or attack. Instead, he went completely still, his eyes locked on Havoc with a predatory focus that seemed impossible for an animal. The biker's sneer faltered. "Control your mutt, kid." "He's not a mutt," Peggy replied, her voice steady despite the fear in her eyes. "And he's not the one you should be worried about." As Peggy reached for her phone, something in Havoc's expression shifted from arrogance to uncertainty. What he and his shadow vipers couldn't possibly know was that this encounter with a small girl and her dog would ignite a conflict that would transform the town of Riverstone forever and reveal secrets that had been buried since the battlefields of Afghanistan. Leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments along with the city you're watching from. Now let's continue with the story. Margaret Peggy Thompson was not your typical 9-year-old. Diagnosed with mild autism at age 4, she lived in a world where clear patterns provided comfort and animals made more sense than people. Her coppery red hair framed a face scattered with freckles, and behind her glasses, deep green eyes observed the world with extraordinary focus. Since her mother's death 2 years ago, Peggy had found her voice through Max, the German shepherd who served as both her therapy dog and her protector. Their bond transcended ordinary pet ownership. Max had been specially trained by her mother, Catherine Thompson, but once the Army's most respected K-9 handler before cancer took her too soon. Home for Peggy was a modest 2-story house on Maple Street in Riverstone, Virginia, population 8,742, where everyone knew everyone else's business. At night, she often heard her father pacing, fighting battles in his mind that never truly ended when he returned from Afghanistan. Colonel Jack Iron Jack Morrison had earned his nickname by surviving an A-8 explosion that killed 3 of his men. The physical scars had healed, but the psychological wounds remained open, making raising a special needs daughter alone all the more challenging. Iron Jack wasn't just any veteran, he was the respected leader of the Veterans Guard, a motorcycle club comprised entirely of combat veterans. They weren't outlaws, most held regular jobs as mechanics, teachers, or business owners, but their military precision and brotherhood remained intact. They gathered weekly at the old VFW hall, where the sound of laughter occasionally broke through the shared understanding of trauma that bound them together. For these men and women, the club wasn't about rebellion, it was about survival. The Shadow Vipers had rolled into Riverstone 6 months ago, establishing their clubhouse in an abandoned warehouse on the edge of town. Their leader, Marcus Havoc Reynolds, ruled through intimidation. What few knew was that behind his violent facade lay a personal vendetta. His younger brother, Samuel, had returned from war paralyzed from the waist down, with the government benefits barely covering basic care. In Havoc's mind, the military had broken his brother and then abandoned him, creating a specific hatred for anyone connected to the armed forces. His gang had systematically begun pressuring local businesses for protection money, focusing particularly on veteran-owned establishments. Sheriff Roberts, understaffed and underfunded, could do little but document the escalating tensions. Every Tuesday morning followed the same routine for Peggy Thompson. Her father would drop her at Diana's diner where she'd have pancakes with her godmother, Diana, then walk the 3 blocks to Mike's Gas and go with Max to buy her weekly comic book before heading to her therapy session. Diana had been her mother's best friend since high school and maintained the ritual religiously after Catherine's passing. The predictability comforted Peggy amidst a world that had become increasingly chaotic. "Remember, straight there and back," Diana said, adjusting Peggy's red backpack. "Dr. Martinez expects you at 10. Peggy nodded seriously. "I know the way. Max knows, too." The September morning carried the first hint of fall, leaves just beginning to turn at the edges. Max walked perfectly at heel beside Peggy, his military training evident in every measured step. To casual observers, he appeared to be an exceptionally well-behaved pet. But the specially designed harness with subtle military markings told a different story to those who knew what to look for. Jimmy Carson, the 20-something attendant at Mike's, waved from behind the counter as the bell announced their arrival. "Morning, Miss Peggy. Got your new Astro girl saved behind the counter." "Thank you, Jimmy," Peggy replied with the careful formality she used with everyone except her father and Max. She moved methodically through the store, selecting a bottle of water and a small bag of dog treats for Max, placing them on the counter with exact movements. The peaceful routine shattered with the arrival of the Shadow Vipers. Their motorcycles pulled into the lot like a swarm, cutting engines simultaneously in what seemed like a choreographed display of intimidation. Jimmy's face drained of color. "Not again," he muttered, reaching for his phone. "Third time this week." Max immediately positioned himself between Peggy and the door, his behavior shifting subtly from companion to guardian without a command being given. Peggy felt her heart rate accelerate, but focused on her breathing techniques, 4 counts in, hold for 7, out for 8, just as her therapist had taught her. The bell jangled harshly as Havoc entered, flanked by 2 other men whose vests identified them as Snake and Diesel. The latter was leaner than the others, with calculating eyes that immediately assessed the store's occupants. "Well, if it isn't Jimmy Boy," Havoc announced, slapping the counter hard enough to make the candy display rattle. "We're here to discuss your contribution to local business development." Jimmy swallowed visibly. "I told you yesterday I don't own this place. Mr. Mike will be back tomorrow. You need to talk to him." "See, that's not how this works," Havoc replied, his voice lowering to a menacing growl. "Every business contributes. Not tomorrow. Today." Peggy stood frozen by the comic book rack, her fingers tightly gripping Max's harness. She tried to make herself invisible, but Diesel's sharp eyes had already registered her presence. "You got a customer, Jimmy," he observed, his tone different from Havoc's, calmer, more measured, but somehow more unsettling. Havoc turned, noticing Peggy and Max for the first time. Something in his expression shifted from intimidation to actual malice. "Military dog," he spat, recognizing Max's bearing instantly. "Let me guess, Daddy's a soldier." Peggy didn't answer, but her chin lifted slightly, a gesture that unconsciously mirrored her father's defiance. Havoc moved closer, looming over the small girl. "I asked you a question, kid. Your daddy play soldier?" Colonel, Peggy corrected reflexively, immediately regretting it as Havoc's face darkened. "Colonel, huh? Well, ain't that special." He circled Peggy and Max, the German Shepherd, turning in place to maintain position between the threat and his charge. "Military types think they're better than everyone else. Better than guys like us." "Leave her alone," Jimmy called, his voice cracking. "She's just a kid. Just teaching a life lesson, Jimmy boy." Havoc reached down suddenly, grabbing Peggy's backpack. "Let's see what Colonel's daughter carries around." Max's reaction was immediate, a low, controlled growl that carried no warning, only promise. Several of the bikers who had entered behind Havoc shifted uncomfortably. "That dog looks serious, Havoc," Snake muttered, taking a step back. "It's just a mutt," Havoc replied, but his hand hesitated before wrenching the backpack from Peggy's shoulders, tossing its contents across the floor: comics, therapy workbooks, a and a framed photo of Catherine in military uniform shattered on the linoleum. Something changed in Peggy's expression as she stared at her mother's broken picture. Her hands trembled, but not from fear. She made a subtle gesture, 3 fingers extended, then curled inward, the special signal her mother had taught her for situations of extreme danger. Max didn't lunge or bark. Instead, he went completely still, a controlled weapon awaiting final deployment. The shift in the dog's demeanor was palpable enough that even Havoc sensed it, taking an involuntary step back. "Control your dog, kid," he warned, his bravado wavering slightly, "before something bad happens to it." Peggy's voice, when it came, held a steadiness that belied her years. "His name is Max. He was my mom's military working dog in Afghanistan. He found 37 IEDs and saved 114 soldiers." The specificity of the numbers landed with surprising impact. Even Havoc seemed momentarily disarmed by the information. Diesel's eyes narrowed with professional interest. "MBD? What unit?" Before Peggy could answer, Havoc grabbed her arm, his patience evaporating. "I don't care if this mutt saved the president. In this town, everyone shows respect." Max didn't move, but a new sound emerged from deep in his chest, not a growl but something more primitive. Jimmy was frantically dialing on his phone. "The police won't get here for at least 15 minutes, Havoc said with a cruel smile. "Plenty of time for us to finish our conversation." Peggy didn't struggle against his grip. Instead, she reached slowly into her pocket with her free hand and withdrew her phone. "I'm not calling the police," she said quietly. "Who then, your daddy?" Havoc mocked, but something in Peggy's calm frightened him more than tears would have. "You know what my mom taught me before she died?" Peggy asked, her finger hovering over the speed dial. "She said real courage isn't about being the strongest or the scariest. It's about knowing when to ask for help." The phone connected, and Peggy spoke 6 words that would change Riverstone forever. "Dad, we need the Veterans Guard." "Now." The sound came first a distant rumble that grew steadily louder until it filled the small gas station with its thunderous presence. Motorcycles, dozens of them, their engines synchronized in a way that spoke of military precision rather than chaotic rebellion. The Veterans Guard had arrived. Havoc released Peggy's arm, shoving her backward as he moved toward the door. Max immediately repositioned himself beside her, his training preventing him from attacking without command despite the clear threat to his charge. Through the large front windows, they watched as the Veterans Guard formed a perfect perimeter around the gas station. There were bikes arranged with tactical precision to block all potential escape routes. Colonel Jack "Iron Jack" Morrison dismounted first, removing his helmet to reveal silver-streaked dark hair and a face weathered by sun and experience. His leather vest bore no ostentatious patches, just a simple American flag and his unit insignia. The other riders followed his lead, creating a wall of veterans representing every branch of service and multiple conflicts. They didn't rush or shout. Their discipline was more intimidating than any display of aggression could have been. "This was a mistake," Snake muttered to Havoc, eyeing the veterans uneasily. "There's at least 30 of them. 43. Diesel corrected quietly, his assessment automatic and professional. "All combat veterans based on their formation and approach." Iron Jack entered alone, his eyes immediately finding Peggy, scanning her for injury with the quick efficiency of a combat medic. "You okay, Pegs?" he asked, his voice deliberately calm. Peggy nodded once, her composure remarkable for a child her age. "They broke Mom's picture," she said, pointing to the shattered frame. Something dangerous flashed in Iron Jack's eyes as he turned his attention to Havoc. The 2 men assessed each other with the wariness of alpha predators, neither willing to show weakness by looking away first. "Your daughter needs to learn respect," Havoc said, attempting to maintain his bravado despite being severely outnumbered. "Seems to me," Iron Jack replied with deceptive mildness, "that you're confusing respect with fear. A common mistake among men who've never earned the former." The gas station had become a theater of tension, with Jimmy and the few other customers pressed against the far wall, unwilling spectators to the confrontation. Outside, the veterans' guard maintained their positions, patient and unwavering. "We done here, Havoc?" Diesel asked quietly, a note of pragmatism in his voice that cut through his leader's pride. "We're outnumbered and outpositioned." Havoc's face twisted with humiliation and rage, but even he couldn't ignore the tactical reality. "This isn't over," he promised, his gaze shifting between Iron Jack and Peggy. "Not by a long shot." "For today it is," Iron Jack replied evenly. "My daughter and I are going home now. I suggest you and your boys do the same." The Shadow Vipers retreated with as much dignity as they could muster, their motorcycles roaring to life with unnecessary force as they peeled out of the parking lot. Only after they had disappeared did Iron Jack kneel to Peggy's level, his composure giving way to concerned fatherhood. "I'm so sorry, sweetheart," he said, carefully gathering the broken pieces of Catherine's photograph. "We'll get this fixed, good as new." By noon, news of the confrontation had spread throughout Riverstone. In Diana's diner, opinions divided the lunch crowd as clearly as the vinyl booths that separated them. "The veterans showed them who's boss," declared Tom Mason, the hardware store owner who'd been paying protection money to the Shadow Vipers for 3 months. "About time someone stood up to those thugs." "And what happens when the veterans aren't around?" countered Sarah Williams, the elementary school principal. "You think those bikers are just going to slink away with their tails between their legs? They'll be back, and they'll be angry." Sheriff Roberts sat at the counter nursing a coffee and the beginnings of a migraine. At 62, with 30 years in law enforcement following his tours in Vietnam, he recognized an escalating situation when he saw one. "Jack," he said when Iron Jack entered with Peggy and Max, "we need to talk. Privately." The sheriff's office was a testament to municipal budget constraints, cracked linoleum, ancient filing cabinets, and a coffee maker that had seen at least 4 administrations. Roberts closed the door, offering Peggy a lollipop from his desk drawer before addressing her father. "This is going to get worse before it gets better," he said without preamble. "I've got 2 deputies for the entire county. The state police are stretched thin. I can't provide round-the-clock protection for every business in town." Iron Jack nodded, unsurprised. "We're not asking you to, Bill. The Veterans Guard can handle security." "Vigilante justice isn't the answer," Roberts warned. "These Shadow Vipers, they're not just local troublemakers. They've got connections to larger organizations. They've been establishing trafficking routes through 3 counties. All the more reason to stand against them now," Iron Jack argued, "before they sink their roots deeper." Peggy sat quietly, appearing absorbed in unwrapping her lollipop, while Max rested his head on her knee. But she was listening to every word, filing away information with the meticulous precision that characterized her thinking. "They'll target you directly now," Roberts said, his voice softening as he glanced at Peggy. "Not just the veterans, your family. That little girl." "I know," Iron Jack acknowledged, his jaw tightening. "We've already started preparations." Meanwhile, at the abandoned warehouse that served as the Shadow Vipers' clubhouse, Havoc paced furiously, kicking over chairs and hurling empty bottles against the wall as his gang watched uneasily. "One phone call," he seethed. "One phone call and those military has-beens assembled like they were still in uniform. Who does that self-righteous colonel think he is?" Diesel watched from the corner, his expression thoughtful rather than enraged. "They're organized," he observed, "disciplined. This isn't going to be like intimidating business owners and scaring teenagers." "I don't care if they're Navy SEALs," Havoc snapped. "This is our territory now, and that little girl, she's the key, the colonel's weak spot." "The girl has a military dog," Diesel pointed out, a note of professional respect in his voice. "That's not a pet, it's a weapon with teeth." Havoc's smile was ugly with malice. "Then we'll have to neutralize it, won't we? Make some calls. I want every Shadow Viper within 100 miles in Riverstone by tomorrow. It's time this town learned what happens when people don't show proper respect. As night fell over Riverstone, both sides prepared for a conflict that would test not just their strength, but the very soul of the community. And at the center of it all was a 9-year-old girl who understood more about courage and loyalty than most adults would learn in a lifetime. By dawn, the Veterans Guard had established a protective presence throughout Riverstone. Teams of 2 patrolled the main streets on their motorcycles, while others stationed themselves outside key businesses. Iron Jack had converted his garage into a makeshift command center, with maps of the town pinned to plywood boards and a communications setup that would have impressed military tacticians. The veterans operated with the efficiency of men and women who had never truly left their training behind. Peggy's morning routine had been altered for safety. Instead of walking to school, she now rode with Mrs. Bennett, her father's friend whose son attended the same special education program. Max accompanied her everywhere, his service dog vest ensuring he could remain by her side throughout the school day. The teachers had been briefed on the situation, though the details had been sanitized to avoid frightening the other children. "Remember, Peggy," Iron Jack instructed as he checked her backpack, "if anything feels wrong, anything at all, you use your phone. 1 button and I'll be there." Peggy nodded solemnly. "I know, Dad." Max knows too. The Shadow Vipers made their first move midweek. 2 motorcycles were spotted circling Jefferson Elementary during recess, riding slowly past the fence where children played. The riders made no aggressive moves, but their message was clear. They knew where Peggy went to school. The Veterans Guard responded immediately, with 4 members establishing positions around the school perimeter, while Principal Williams imposed a temporary indoor recess policy. "They're testing our response times," Iron Jack told Sarah Chin, one of the few female members of the Veterans Guard and a former intelligence officer. "Seeing how quickly we react, what resources we commit." Classic reconnaissance, Sarah agreed, updating their surveillance notes. "What concerns me is their interest in the school. They're signaling they're willing to target children." "Not children," Iron Jack corrected grimly. "My child. This is personal for Havoc now." The confrontation escalated the following day when Max was targeted. Peggy and her classmates were returning from the library when a pickup truck swerved deliberately toward the sidewalk where they walked in a neat line. The children scattered, screaming in terror as the truck mounted the curb. Max reacted instantly, pushing Peggy clear with his body before the vehicle could strike her. The German Shepherd wasn't as fortunate. The truck's bumper caught his hindquarters, sending him tumbling across the grass with a yelp of pain that haunted Peggy's nightmares for weeks afterward. Multiple contusions and a dislocated hip, the veterinarian informed Iron Jack as Peggy sat beside Max's treatment table, her small hand resting on his sedated form. "He'll need surgery to repair the damage properly. It's going to be expensive and recovery will take months." "Whatever it costs," Iron Jack said without hesitation. "That dog saved my daughter's life." The attack on Max ignited community reaction unlike anything Riverstone had seen before. The town hall meeting that evening overflowed its capacity, with citizens spilling onto the lawn outside, straining to hear through open windows. Mayor Wilson, a politically cautious man usually more concerned with zoning regulations than confrontation, found himself facing an angry populace demanding action. "The police are doing everything they can," he insisted, perspiration beading on his forehead as he faced the crowd. "Sheriff Roberts has requested additional support from the state police." "When?" interrupted Tom Mason, standing up from his seat in the 3rd row. "My store's been paying protection for 3 months. I've filed 6 police reports. Nothing's changed except now they're going after children." The crowd's murmur grew to an angry rumble. Sheriff Roberts took the microphone, his weathered face grave. "We're building a case, gathering evidence. These things take time if we want charges that stick." "And meanwhile what?" demanded Diana from the diner. "We just wait until someone gets killed? That truck could have hit any of those children." From the back of the room, a small voice cut through the adult arguments. My mom always said that fighting fire with fire just burns everything down. Heads turned to find Peggy standing in the aisle, her red hair gleaming under the fluorescent lights. Iron Jack moved to intercept her, but she continued speaking, her voice gaining strength. Before she died, my mom trained dogs to protect soldiers. She said the best protection isn't about being scary or mean. It's about being smart and working together. The room fell silent, adults momentarily chastened by the clear logic of a child who had already faced more loss than many of them. Mayor Wilson seized the moment, perhaps seeing a way to redirect the community's anger. Out of the mouths of babes, he said with a nervous chuckle, "Perhaps we should consider a more unified, strategic approach." "Like what, exactly?" challenged Sarah Williams, the principal. "Holding hands and singing Kumbaya while these thugs terrorize our town." The meeting devolved into factions after that, those advocating aggressive confrontation, those favoring legal processes, and a growing middle group who recognized that neither approach alone would suffice. Through it all, Peggy sat quietly beside her father, observing the adult chaos with the detached interest of an anthropologist studying an unfamiliar tribe. Later that night, as Iron Jack tucked her into bed, Peggy asked the question that had been forming in her mind since the town hall. "Dad, why is the man with the snake on his motorcycle so angry at veterans?" Iron Jack sat heavily on the edge of her bed, choosing his words carefully. "Sometimes, sweetheart, people blame others for things that aren't really their fault. Havoc, the man with the snake, his brother, was a soldier who got hurt badly in the war. The same war where I served. He came home different, needing special care, and there wasn't enough help for him. Like how Mom needed special medicines that were too expensive." Iron Jack's breath caught at the unexpected parallel. "Something like that, yes. Havoc blames the military and by extension anyone connected to it for what happened to his brother." "That's why he hates us? Because you were a colonel?" "That's part of it," Iron Jack acknowledged. "The other part is that people like Havoc need someone to fear them to feel powerful. When the Veterans Guard stood up to him, we took that power away. That's something men like him can't forgive." Peggy considered this, processing it through her uniquely ordered mind. Does his brother hate veterans too? The question caught Iron Jack off guard. "I don't know, Pegs. I've never met him." "Maybe we should," Peggy suggested, her logical mind finding a direct path that adults often overlooked. Mom always said understanding why someone's angry is the first step to making peace. Iron Jack smiled sadly, brushing a strand of hair from her forehead. "Your mom was a very wise woman, but some situations are too complicated for simple solutions." "Nothing's simple about understanding people," Peggy replied with the peculiar wisdom that sometimes emerged from her differently wired brain. "It's the hardest thing there is." The next day brought an unexpected revelation. Sarah Chin burst into the command center, her usually composed demeanor visibly shaken. "We've got a leak," she announced to the assembled veterans. "Someone in town leadership is feeding information to the Shadow Vipers." Iron Jack's expression darkened. "You're certain?" "The truck that hit Max?" It knew exactly when and where Peggy would be walking back from the library. "That's not published information. It's internal school scheduling that changes weekly." "Could be someone on the school staff," suggested Mike Donovan, a former Marine who now worked as the town's most respected electrician. Sarah shook her head. "It's bigger than that. They knew our patrol patterns, exactly which routes would be temporarily uncovered during shift changes. That information only exists in two places, here and at the sheriff's office, where we coordinated with Roberts." The implications settled heavily on the room. Someone they trusted, someone with access to official information, was betraying them to the Shadow Vipers. "We need to flush them out," Iron Jack decided. "Feed different information to different potential sources, see which details make it back to the Vipers." "And meanwhile," Sarah pressed, "Peggy's still at risk. Max is recovering from surgery. We're stretched thin covering the town 24/7. The mention of Max's surgery brought another concern to the surface. The veterinary bill had come to $12,000 money that Iron Jack, living on a military pension while raising a special needs child, simply didn't have. He had put half on credit cards and was selling his prized vintage motorcycle to cover the rest, but the financial strain was yet another pressure point in an already tense situation. What none of them realized was that Peggy, with her habit of listening quietly while adults thought she wasn't paying attention, had overheard everything. That afternoon, after school, she convinced Mrs. Bennett to take a detour past the veterinary clinic where Max was recovering. While the kindly woman chatted with the receptionist, Peggy slipped into the treatment area, finding her faithful companion in a large kennel, his hindquarters heavily bandaged. "I miss you at home," she whispered, pressing her face to the kennel door. "Dad pretends he's not worried, but he paces all night like he did after Mom died." Max whined softly, his tail thumping weakly against his bedding. "The bad men hurt you because of me," Peggy continued, a tear sliding down her cheek. "But I'm going to fix it. Mom taught me how." A noise in the hallway alerted her to someone approaching. Quickly wiping her tears, Peggy stepped back just as a tall, lean man in medical scrubs entered the room. She recognized him instantly despite the surgical mask covering half his face. "You're the one called Diesel," she said, neither accusatory nor frightened, simply stating a fact. The man froze, clearly not expecting to be identified by a 9-year-old. After a moment's hesitation, he pulled down his mask, revealing the same calculating eyes she remembered from the gas station. "And you're Colonel Morrison's daughter," he replied evenly. "You shouldn't be back here alone." "Neither should you," Peggy countered with impeccable logic. "You're not a veterinarian or a technician." A ghost of a smile touched Diesel's lips. "Observant, like your mother." The casual reference to Catherine sent a jolt through Peggy. "You knew my mom?" "I knew of her," Diesel clarified, maintaining a cautious distance between them. "Her reputation. Catherine Thompson was the best K-9 trainer the Army ever had. That dog," he nodded toward Max, "is proof of her skill." "Why are you here?" Peggy asked directly. "Are you going to hurt Max again?" Something like offense flickered across Diesel's face. "I had nothing to do with that. Arming an animal, especially a military working dog," he didn't finish the thought, but his disgust seemed genuine. "Then why?" Diesel studied her for a long moment before answering. "Professional curiosity. Military working dogs are special. Valuable. I wanted to see how badly he was injured." "He needs expensive surgery," Peggy said. "Dad's selling his motorcycle to pay for it." "Your father's Harley Softail? The 93? A note of genuine surprise entered Diesel's voice. "He loves that bike." "He loves me more," Peggy replied simply. "And Max saved me." Before Diesel could respond, voices in the hallway announced Mrs. Bennett's approach with a clinic staff member. He replaced his mask quickly, nodding once to Peggy before slipping out through a back door. That evening, a mysterious envelope was delivered to the Morrison home. Inside was $6,000 in cash and a note that read simply, "For the dog's medical bills. Military working dogs deserve respect." There was no signature, but Iron Jack's expression as he examined the cash told Peggy he had his suspicions about its source. "Dad," she said as he tucked the money into a drawer, clearly conflicted about accepting it. "I think not everyone in the Shadow Vipers is the same kind of bad." Iron Jack looked at her sharply. "What makes you say that?" Peggy hesitated, knowing she should tell him about the encounter with Diesel, but sensing intuitively that doing so might close a door that needed to remain open. "Just a feeling," she said instead. "Like how some kids at school are mean because their friends are watching, but different when they're alone." Iron Jack seemed to age before her eyes, the weight of responsibility visible in the new lines on his face. "I hope you're right, Pegs, because this situation is getting worse, and I don't see a clear way out that doesn't end with people getting hurt." He didn't know how prophetic those words would prove to be. The next day, as Iron Jack was meeting with Sheriff Roberts to discuss the potential leak, Peggy's Aunt Lisa, his younger sister, arrived unexpectedly at their home. "I need to talk to you, Jack," she said, her expression uncharacteristically serious. "It's about the shadow vipers, and it's about me." The revelation that followed would shift the entire conflict in ways no one could have anticipated. Lisa, a nurse at the county hospital, had been dating a man for 3 months. A man she knew only as Daniel, who had recently revealed his true identity to her, Daniel Snake Williams, Havoc's right-hand man. "He's not like the others, Jack," she insisted in the face of her brother's thunderous silence. "He was trying to get out before all this started. Now he's in too deep, afraid of what Havoc might do if he tries to leave." "And you're telling me this now?" Iron Jack's voice was dangerously quiet. "After my daughter was almost killed, after her dog was run down in the street?" "He's been feeding me information," Lisa continued desperately, "warning me when something big was planned so I could get word to you. How do you think you knew to have men at the school that day? It wasn't luck, Jack." The implications cascaded through Iron Jack's tactical mind. "He's your source," he said to Sheriff Roberts, who had remained silent throughout Lisa's confession. Roberts nodded once. "One of them. Confidential informants are a necessary part of law enforcement." "And you didn't think to tell me that my sister was involved with the Shadow Viper?" Iron Jack's control was slipping, the PTSD that he kept carefully contained beginning to surface in the tremor of his hands. "Need-to-know basis," Roberts replied, unapologetic. "The fewer people who knew, the safer for everyone involved, including your sister." "Dad?" Peggy's voice came from the doorway where she stood in her pajamas, Max's empty bed cushion clutched in her arms. The adults fell silent, suddenly aware of how their raised voices must have carried through the house. Is Aunt Lisa in trouble? Iron Jack took a deep breath, forcing his trauma response back into its box with the practiced discipline of a man who had been fighting this battle for years. "No, sweetheart. Aunt Lisa is helping us understand some things about the people who hurt Max. It's complicated adult stuff." "About Havoc's brother?" Peggy asked, her mind making connections that surprised the adults. "The one who got hurt in the war." Lisa looked at her niece with newfound respect. "Yes, partly. Samuel Reynolds. He's a patient at the care facility where I work sometimes. He's paralyzed from the waist down, a spinal cord injury from an IED in Afghanistan." Something shifted in Iron Jack's expression, a recognition that landed like a physical blow. "Samuel Reynolds," he repeated. "From the 173rd Airborne? Operation Hammerstrike?" Lisa nodded, confused by his reaction. "You knew him?" Iron Jack sank into a chair, his face ashen. "I was the commanding officer on the mission where he was injured. His unit was under my direct command." The revelation hung in the air, altering the entire landscape of the conflict. What had seemed like random targeting of veterans now revealed itself as something far more personal, a vendetta against the very man Havoc held responsible for Ian. His brother's ruined life. The attack began at midnight with coordinated precision that revealed Havoc's strategy had evolved beyond mere intimidation. The Shadow Vipers struck simultaneously at multiple locations across Riverstone, targeting businesses owned by veterans or those who had openly supported the Veterans Guard. The first alarm came from Tom Mason's hardware store, where security cameras captured 3 motorcycles pulling up to the darkened storefront. The riders didn't bother with subtlety. Molotov cocktails shattered the display windows, flames erupting instantly as they roared away into the night. Within minutes, similar reports flooded the Veterans Guard Command Center, Diana's Diner, Mike's Auto Repair, the VFW Hall, all ablaze. The timing was deliberate, calculated to stretch the town's limited firefighting resources beyond capacity. But Sheriff Roberts mobilized his deputies while Iron Jack deployed the Veterans Guard in response teams, prioritizing locations where people might be trapped. "They're creating chaos," Sarah Chin observed grimly as she coordinated communications, "making us react rather than act." Iron Jack nodded, his military training allowing him to remain outwardly calm despite the crisis. Classic diversion tactic. The question is, what are they diverting us from? The answer came from an unexpected source. Peggy, who should have been asleep in her bed, appeared in the doorway of the command center, Max limping determinedly beside her despite his surgical staples and bandages. The German Shepherd had been released early from the veterinary clinic that afternoon, still weeks from full recovery but stable enough to return home. He shouldn't have been able to navigate the stairs from Peggy's bedroom, yet here he was, alertness evident in every line of his body. "Dad," Peggy said with unusual urgency, "Max woke me up. Something's wrong." Before Iron Jack could respond, a deafening explosion rocked the night, powerful enough to rattle windows a mile away. Through the command center's windows, an orange glow illuminated the sky to the east, the direction of Diana's diner. "That wasn't a Molotov," Sarah stated, already reaching for her radio. "That was something much bigger." Improvised explosive device, Iron Jack confirmed, his expression grim. "Military grade. This just escalated beyond street violence." As emergency vehicles screamed toward the diner, Peggy tugged insistently at her father's sleeve. "Dad, listen to me. It's not just the diner. Max is trying to tell us something." In the chaos, most adults would have dismissed a child's concern, especially one involving a dog's supposed communication. But Iron Jack had learned long ago that his daughter's connection with Max went beyond ordinary understanding, and Catherine had trained the German Shepherd with capabilities that exceeded standard service animals. "What is he telling you, Pegs?" "He keeps looking at the door, then back at me, like when Mom taught him to lead people to something important." Peggy's eyes reflected the distant fires visible through the windows. "I think he knows where they're going to hit next." It seemed impossible. How could Max have intelligence about shadow viper targets? Yet Iron Jack had seen too many inexplicable things in combat to dismiss his daughter's intuition outright. "Sarah, hold the fort. I need to check something." With Peggy and Max leading the way, they exited the house into the chaos-filled night. Max moved with painful determination, his injury evident in his gait, but his purpose unwavering. He led them not toward the burning businesses downtown, but in the opposite direction toward Jefferson Elementary School. "The school?" Iron Jack questioned as they approached the darkened building. Why would they target? The realization hit him with sickening clarity. The school wasn't just any building, it was where veterans' children gathered daily. It's a symbol of future generations, the ultimate psychological target. 3 motorcycles were parked behind the school's gymnasium, their riders working with purposeful efficiency in the shadows. Even from a distance, Iron Jack could identify explosives being positioned at key structural points, the same demolition pattern he had seen used by combat engineers in Afghanistan. "Call Roberts," he whispered to Peggy, pressing his phone into her small hand. "Tell him we need everyone at the elementary school immediately. Then take Max and hide in those trees. Do not come out until I come for you. Dad. May. No arguments, Peggy. Not this time." The shadow vipers were so focused on their task that they didn't notice Iron Jack's approach until he was almost upon them. Even then, their reaction was delayed by surprise. They clearly hadn't expected resistance at this location, believing the veterans' guard fully occupied with the fires across town. "This ends now," Iron Jack announced, his voice carrying the unmistakable command presence that had once directed troops in combat. The 3 men spun toward him, one reaching instinctively toward a weapon at his waistband. Iron Jack's response was immediate and measured. He didn't draw a weapon of his own, but his stance shifted subtly, ready to neutralize the threat if necessary. Colonel Morrison, one of the men, acknowledged, stepping into the dim light to reveal Diesel's lean features. "You're supposed to be downtown saving your burning businesses." "And you're supposed to be smarter than this," Iron Jack replied evenly. "Attacking a school? Even for the shadow vipers, that's crossing a line." Orders are orders, Diesel responded, though something in his tone suggested reluctance. Havoc wants Riverstone to understand there are consequences for defiance. By threatening children. Is that who you are now, Diesel? A man who bombs elementary schools. The question hung in the air, weighted with moral challenge. Before Diesel could respond, sirens pierced the night. Sheriff Roberts and his deputies approaching rapidly. You need to leave, Iron Jack said with sudden urgency. All of you. This isn't a fight you want to have on your record. Diesel's eyes narrowed with suspicion. Why would you warn us? Because whatever's between Havoc and me doesn't justify this, Iron Jack replied. And because my daughter believes not everyone in your club is beyond redemption. I'm choosing to test that theory. Something shifted in Diesel's expression, recognition, perhaps, or the first fracture in a hardened facade. Without another word, he motioned to his companions. They abandoned their explosives, mounting their motorcycles and disappearing into the night just as the first police cruisers rounded the corner. The following morning dawned on a Riverstone forever changed. 4 businesses had burned to their foundations, though miraculously no lives had been lost. The unexploded devices at the elementary school had been safely removed by a state police bomb squad. But the psychological damage was done. The Shadow Vipers had demonstrated both their willingness to escalate to lethal force and their ability to coordinate complex attacks. What no one had anticipated was the community's response. As the sun climbed higher, residents began to gather downtown, arriving with tools, building materials, and unwavering determination. Without formal organization or official direction, the citizens of Riverstone set about rebuilding what had been destroyed. Tom Mason stood amid the charred remains of his hardware store, his face streaked with soot and tears as neighbors hauled away debris and contractors who were usually competitors worked side by side to stabilize the damaged structure. 43 years, he said to no one in particular. My father opened this store 43 years ago. I thought it was gone. Not gone, replied Diana, who had arrived with coffee and sandwiches for the workers despite her own diner being among the casualties. Is temporarily unavailable. We'll have you reopened within a week. How can you be so sure? Diana gestured toward the bustling activity that had transformed downtown. Because that's what Riverstone does. We take care of our own. The Veterans Guard had integrated seamlessly into the recovery effort, their military training proving invaluable in organizing the chaos into effective action. Iron Jack worked alongside men and women he had once commanded in combat, now directing their shared skills toward healing rather than harm. Peggy and Max observed from a bench across the street, the German Shepherd resting his healing body while maintaining vigilant watch over his charge. The morning's activity had drawn most of the town to the rebuilding effort, creating an inadvertent community gathering unlike anything Riverstone had seen in decades. Your dog looks like he's feeling better, said a voice beside her. Peggy turned to find Diesel standing there, dressed in civilian clothes with no visible Shadow Viper insignia. Despite his attempt at anonymity, Max's head had lifted at his approach, not threatening but alert. The veterinarian said he needs to rest, Peggy replied matter-of-factly. But he doesn't listen very well when he thinks I need him. Diesel nodded as if this made perfect sense. Military working dogs are like that. Loyalty above self-preservation. Your mother taught him well. Did you know my mom? Peggy asked directly, returning to the question she had posed at the veterinary clinic. Not personally, Diesel admitted, sitting down at the far end of the bench. But I worked with dogs she trained. In Afghanistan. I was a handler for the 75th Ranger Regiment. The revelation crystallized pieces of the puzzle in Peggy's ordered mind. That's why you stopped them from bombing the school. Because you're not really one of them. Diesel's mouth tightened. It's complicated, kid. When you come back from over there, you're different. The world doesn't make sense anymore. Sometimes you find family in strange places. Like a motorcycle gang that hurts people. The blunt assessment made Diesel wince. It wasn't always like this. Havoc, he's changed since he found out about your dad's connection to his brother. It's become personal for him. Dangerous. Is he going to try to hurt my dad? He's planning something, Diesel confirmed, his voice lowering. Something big, not just property damage this time. He's bringing in people from other chapters, stockpiling explosives. After last night's embarrassment, he's out for blood. Why are you telling me this? Peggy asked, her head tilting with genuine curiosity. Diesel seemed to consider the question carefully. Maybe because you remind me of someone. Maybe because there are lines I won't cross. Or maybe because your mother saved my life once and I never got to thank her. Before Peggy could process this new information, a commotion arose from the rebuilding effort. A truck had arrived carrying lumber and supplies, an unremarkable event, except for the identity of the delivery driver. Snake, still wearing his shadow viper vest, climbed down from the cab, looking distinctly uncomfortable under the suddenly hostile gazes of the gathered townspeople. Lisa sent me, he announced, addressing Iron Jack directly. Said you needed 2x4s and roofing nails. I got everything on her list. The silence that followed was deafening. Iron Jack stepped forward, his expression unreadable as he assessed his sister's boyfriend, a man who belonged to the organization that had just burned down half the town. And Havoc approved this delivery? He asked finally. Snake's jaw tightened. Havoc doesn't know. Neither do most of the brothers. He struggled for words. This is just between us. It was a turning point, small but significant. A crack in the monolithic opposition that had threatened to consume Riverstone. Iron Jack nodded once, then extended his hand. After a moment's hesitation, Snake shook it. We could use help unloading, Iron Jack said simply. The gesture was not lost on those watching, particularly not on Diesel, who observed the exchange with an expression that mingled hope and concern. He turned back to Peggy, his voice urgent now. Your father's a good man, better than most. But Havoc isn't going to stop, especially not after seeing this. He nodded toward Snake, who was now passing lumber down to veterans who'd been his enemies just hours before. Then we need to make him stop, Peggy replied with a child's direct logic. It's not that simple. Because of his brother? The one my dad accidentally hurt in the war? Diesel's eyebrows rose. You know about that? I know my dad feels bad about it. And I know Havoc is angry because his brother got hurt and didn't get enough help afterward. Peggy's brow furrowed in concentration. My mom always said that understanding why someone's angry is the first step to making peace. Some angers run too deep for understanding to heal, kid. Then we have to try something else. Peggy's expression suddenly brightened with the particular intensity that often preceded her most unexpectedly insightful moments. Diesel, do you know where Havoc's brother lives? The one in the wheelchair? The question clearly caught him off guard. Samuel? He's at Riverside Care Facility. Why? Because he's the key, Peggy said with absolute certainty. Not the explosives or the motorcycles or even Havoc. If we want to stop this, we need to talk to Samuel. Diesel shook his head slowly. Havoc would never allow it. He's practically built a wall around his brother, only approved visitors, strictly monitored. Then we need to find another way, Peggy insisted. Because this isn't going to end until someone changes Havoc's mind, and the only person who can do that is his brother. The conversation ended abruptly as Iron Jack approached, his expression darkening at the sight of Diesel sitting beside his daughter. Everything okay here, Pegs? Diesel was just telling me about how he worked with Mom's dogs in Afghanistan, Peggy replied truthfully, if selectively. Iron Jack's gaze shifted to the shadow viper, assessing him with the careful scrutiny of a commanding officer. Is that so? Your wife trained the best dogs in the service, Colonel, Diesel replied, standing to leave. That one included. He nodded toward Max, who watched him with intelligent attention. You should be proud of her legacy. "I am," Iron Jack said quietly. "Every day." As Diesel walked away, Peggy watched him with the peculiar intensity that often made adults uncomfortable seeing beyond surface appearances to the complex truths beneath. "Dad," she said after a moment, "I think I know how to stop Havoc." The plan she outlined was breathtaking in both its simplicity and its audacity. So much so that Iron Jack's first instinct was to dismiss it entirely until he recognized in her strategy echoes of Catherine's particular blend of compassion and tactical thinking. "It's dangerous, Peggy," he cautioned. "If it goes wrong." "Mom used to say that sometimes the greatest danger is doing nothing when you could have helped," Peggy replied. "We have to try, Dad. For Riverstone. For Max. For everyone." As rebuilding continued around them, father and daughter finalized a plan that would either end the conflict once and for all or escalate it beyond redemption. Neither of them could know that even as they spoke, Havoc was gathering his forces for a final, devastating assault, one that would target not buildings or businesses, but the heart of the resistance itself, the Morrison family home. The Shadow Viper's warehouse hummed with ominous activity. Motorcycles from 4 different chapters filled the parking lot, their riders gathered inside where Havoc addressed them with the fervor of a man consumed by vengeance. "Tonight we take back what's ours," he proclaimed, pacing before the assembled outlaws. "We show Riverstone and that self-righteous colonel what happens when people disrespect the Shadow Vipers. We hit 'em where it hurts most, we hit 'em at home." In the shadows near the back, Diesel exchanged glances with Snake, a silent communication passing between them. The point of no return was approaching rapidly, forcing each man to decide which side of history they would stand on when the dust finally settled. The sun was setting over Riverstone, painting the sky in shades of amber and crimson that seemed to mirror the tension gripping the town. At the Morrison home, preparations for Peggy's plan were underway. Iron Jack had reluctantly agreed to her strategy, recognizing in it echoes of Catherine's unique approach to conflict resolution. With Sheriff Roberts and key veterans Guard members briefed, they had established a delicate framework that might bring the escalating violence to an end. What none of them anticipated was Havoc's decision to strike first. The attack began with surgical precision at 8:17 p.m. The power to the Morrison home cut out abruptly, plunging the house into darkness. Within seconds, the backup generator should have kicked in, a standard security measure Iron Jack had installed after the initial confrontations, but it remained silent, clearly sabotaged in advance. "Dad?" Peggy called from the living room, where she had been reviewing notes for tomorrow's planned meeting with Samuel Reynolds. "Stay where you are, Pegs," Iron Jack responded calmly, though his body had already shifted into combat readiness. "Remember what we practiced." Max, despite his injuries, was instantly alert, positioning himself protectively beside Peggy. But something was wrong. The German shepherd's ears flickered in confusion, his head tilting as if receiving contradictory information. The first window shattered in the kitchen, followed immediately by a small canister that bounced across the tile floor, releasing a thick cloud of smoke. Not tear gas, this was different. Max whined once, shaking his head as if to clear it. "Dad, something's wrong with Max," Peggy called, genuine fear entering her voice for the first time. Before Iron Jack could respond, the front door splintered inward. Shadowy figures poured through the breach, their movements coordinated and professional. This was no amateur operation. Havoc had clearly enlisted individuals with tactical training for this assault. "Secure the girl and the dog," ordered a voice from within the smoke. "The colonel is mine." Iron Jack had anticipated violence, but not a home invasion of this magnitude. He reached for the panic button that would alert the veterans guard, but a burst of gunfire aimed precisely at the communications equipment in the corner eliminated that option instantly. "Peggy, bathroom now," he shouted, recognizing that their safe room was now their only option. Designed as a secure space with reinforced walls and its own communication system, it could protect Peggy until help arrived if they could reach it. Max should have led the way, shielding Peggy as they moved toward safety. It was what Catherine had trained him to do, what he had done flawlessly in drills. Instead, the German Shepherd stood frozen, his body trembling with apparent confusion. K9 Victor Echo 3, stand down, came a command from the smoke. Max's posture changed instantly. His protective stance beside Peggy dissolved, replaced by a rigid immobility that Iron Jack recognized with horror as a military override command, a failsafe protocol Catherine had built into her dog's training that only handlers should have known. "No," Peggy whispered, understanding instantly what was happening. "Max, come." But the German Shepherd didn't move. His eyes, still fixed on Peggy, but reflected a terrible conflict, the battle between his primary training to protect her and the hardwired command protocol that temporarily overrode it. Through the thickening smoke emerged Diesel, a specialized transmitter in his hand that emitted a frequency only military working dogs were trained to respond to. His expression was one of genuine regret. "I'm sorry, kid," he said to Peggy. "It wasn't supposed to go this way." "You betrayed us," she replied, the hurt in her voice more cutting than any accusation. "You pretended to be our friend." "I never pretended," Diesel insisted, though his actions belied his words. "But some loyalties go deeper than friendship." From the hallway came the sounds of struggle as Iron Jack engaged multiple attackers, his combat training evident in the precision of his defense. But he was outnumbered and fighting in his own home, constrained by the need to protect Peggy rather than fully engage the threat. "K9 Victor Echo 3, escort," Diesel commanded, and Max, still visibly conflicted, moved woodenly to Peggy's side, no longer her protector but her captor. "Take her out the back," Diesel ordered one of his men. "Keep her unharmed. She's leverage, not a target." As they led Peggy away, Diesel moved toward the hallway where Iron Jack was still holding his ground against impossible odds. Their eyes met across the chaotic space commander and former soldier, now standing on opposite sides of a conflict neither had truly wanted. "You know this isn't right," Iron Jack said, blood streaming from a cut above his eye. "Catherine would be ashamed." The words struck Diesel like physical blows, but his response was lost in the sudden arrival of Havoc, who pushed past his lieutenant with single-minded purpose. Finally Havoc said, his face alight with vindictive satisfaction. "The great Colonel Morrison, alone and outmaneuvered. Tell me, Colonel, does it feel like Kalagosh? When my brother's unit was left without proper support because of your miscalculation." Iron Jack's expression tightened at the reference. "Your brother's unit was caught in an ambush that no one could have predicted. I sent every available resource to extract them." "Too little, too late," Havoc spat. "Now you get to experience what it feels like to have everything taken from you. Your home, your daughter, your future." Outside, Peggy was being loaded into a waiting van, Max still following the override commands that kept him docile. She didn't struggle or cry. Instead, she watched everything with the intense focus that characterized her approach to crisis, cataloging details, seeking patterns, but looking for opportunity. One detail stood out immediately. Snake was not among the Shadow Vipers participating in the attack. His absence suggested a fracture in Havoc's organization, perhaps even the possibility of assistance from an unexpected quarter. The van doors closed, separating Peggy from her father and home. Through the window, she watched as veterans' guard motorcycles began arriving in the distance, too late to prevent the abduction, but perhaps in time to save Iron Jack. Inside the house, the confrontation between Havoc and Iron Jack had escalated to physical violence. Despite his military training, Iron Jack found himself overwhelmed by the younger man's rage-fueled strength and the assistance of multiple Shadow Vipers. "Your daughter will be unharmed," Havoc promised as his men secured Iron Jack to a chair. "As long as you agree to my terms. The Veterans Guard disbands. You leave Riverstone permanently, and you make a public statement acknowledging your responsibility for my brother's injuries." "And if I refuse?" Havoc's smile was devoid of humanity. "Then we'll see how well your daughter manages without you. The state foster care system isn't kind to children with special needs." It was the darkest moment Iron Jack had faced since the day Catherine died. Worse, in many ways, because then he had been powerless against cancer's inexorable advance. Now his training, his strength, his lifetime of preparation had proven insufficient to protect the one person who mattered most. As the van carrying Peggy traveled through Riverstone's darkened streets, she focused on Max, searching for any sign of the connection that had defined their relationship since her mother's death. But the German Shepherd sat rigidly across from her, still under the influence of Diesel's override commands. "Max," she whispered, extending her hand palm up as Catherine had taught her. "It's me. It's Peggy." The dog's ears flickered slightly, the only indication that her words had penetrated the control programming. "You remember when Mom got sick?" Peggy continued softly, ignoring the warning glance from her captor. "When she couldn't get out of bed anymore? You slept beside her every night. You knew before anyone that it was time. You protected her until the very end." Max's posture remained unchanged, but his eyes, those soulful amber eyes that had watched over her for years, began to show signs of internal conflict. "Mom told me something before she died," Peggy said, her voice dropping even lower, forcing the dog to focus intently on her words. "She said that no command, no training, no handler could ever override the bond between a dog and its true family. She said love was stronger than any programming." Something shifted in Max's demeanor, a subtle change that only someone who knew him intimately would notice. The rigid compliance began to crack, replaced by the faintest glimmer of recognition. Meanwhile, at the Morrison home, Havoc received an urgent call that transformed his triumph into confusion. "What do you mean he's gone? Samuel can't just leave the care facility. He's paralyzed." The response from the other end of the line clearly stunned him. "Who authorized this? When?" His face darkened with rage. "Find him, now." Iron Jack, despite his restraints and injuries, registered the shift. "Problems with your plan, Havoc?" "Shut up," Havoc snapped, but the confident malice had leached from his voice, replaced by something approaching panic. "This changes nothing." "It changes everything," Iron Jack replied with quiet certainty. "Because you've never understood what truly matters. Not territory, not respect, family. And you've just lost control of yours." As Iron Jack spoke these words, a convoy of vehicles approached Riverside Care Facility, the residential center where Samuel Reynolds had lived since his injury in Afghanistan. Leading this unlikely procession was Sheriff Roberts' police cruiser, followed by Lisa Morrison's sedan and a Veterans Guard motorcycle escort. Inside Lisa's car, Sarah Chin checked her watch with military precision. "We're right on schedule. If Peggy's information is correct, Havoc's security detail around Samuel should be minimal now, with most of his forces committed to the attack on your house." "Let's hope she's right," Lisa replied, her knuckles white on the steering wheel. "For everyone's sake." Samuel Reynolds sat in his wheelchair by the window of room 217 at Riverside Care Facility, his gaunt features illuminated by the soft glow of a reading lamp. The former Army Ranger's powerful upper body contrasted sharply with his atrophied legs, a daily reminder of the aid that had shattered his spine in Afghanistan 7 years earlier. A dog-eared copy of Hemingway's For Whom the Bell Tolls lay open on his lap, though his attention had drifted to the darkness beyond the glass. The soft knock at his door was expected. The identity of his visitors was not. "Mr. Reynolds," Sheriff Roberts began formally, entering first. "I apologize for the late hour. We need to speak with you about your brother." Samuel's eyes widened at the sight of the group that followed a woman he recognized as a nurse from the hospital, another woman in Veterans Guard attire, and finally a face that triggered a cascade of complex emotions. "Colonel Morrison," he acknowledged, his voice rough from disuse. "I wondered if you'd ever find the courage to face me." Iron Jack's sister Lisa stepped forward. "Samuel, your brother Marcus has taken a young girl hostage. A 9-year-old child. The colonel's daughter." Samuel's expression remained carefully neutral, but his hands gripped the armrests of his wheelchair. "Marcus has always had a temper. But kidnapping a child? That doesn't sound like him." Your brother isn't the man you knew before your injury, Sarah Chin said gently. The Shadow Vipers have evolved from a motorcycle club into something much darker under his leadership. And why should I believe you? Samuel challenged, his gaze returning to Iron Jack. The man who sent my unit into an ambush without proper intelligence? The accusation hung in the air, heavy with years of bitterness. Iron Jack stepped forward, meeting Samuel's eyes directly. Is that what Marcus told you happened at Kalagush? He didn't need to tell me. I was there. Samuel's voice hardened. 3rd Platoon, pinned down for 17 hours. 4 men died waiting for support that came too late. Iron Jack nodded, acknowledging the painful truth. 4 good men. Sergeant Miller, Corporal Watts, Specialist Jensen and Rodriguez. I remember every name, every face. This admission seemed to catch Samuel off guard. You know their names? I know all their names. All 37 men in that valley. I know which ones made it out and which ones didn't. I carry that responsibility every day. Something shifted in Samuel's expression, not forgiveness, but perhaps the first crack in a wall of hatred built on incomplete understanding. What Marcus may not have told you, Iron Jack continued carefully, is that I was in a helicopter heading to your position when command ordered us to turn back. Intelligence had identified a second ambush waiting for the extraction team. He paused, the memory still raw. I disobeyed that order. We turned off our radio. When anyway? Samuel's brow furrowed. I don't understand. If you came for us. We took heavy fire 3 clicks from your position. The helicopter went down. By the time we fought our way to you on foot, those 4 men had already died. Iron Jack's voice remained steady, though the cost of maintaining that control was evident in his face. I failed them. Failed you. That's a truth I've never denied. Meanwhile, in the Shadow Viper's van, Peggy continued her quiet, determined effort to break through Diesel's control over Max. The German Shepherd's internal conflict was becoming more visible. Subtle whines, shifts in posture, the occasional flicker of recognition in his eyes. You're wasting your time, kid, said her captor, a heavy-set biker who'd introduced himself as Grinder. That dog's been shut down by professional commands. He's not coming back until Diesel releases him. You don't understand Max, Peggy replied simply. We're military working dogs. My mom always said the bond goes deeper than training. To demonstrate, she slowly extended her hand again, this time making a subtle gesture different from the one she'd used at the gas station. This was more intimate. A communication developed between her and Max during Catherine's final months. The change was immediate and dramatic. Max's rigid posture collapsed, his training override crumbling in the face of a more profound connection. With a soft whine that sounded almost like apology, he crossed the van to press his head against Peggy's chest. Impossible, Grinder muttered, reaching for his radio. Diesel, the dog's broken protocol. He never completed the transmission. With a silent command from Peggy, Max moved with astonishing speed despite his injuries, positioning himself between his charge and the potential threat. The German Shepherd didn't attack, he simply established a clear boundary, his message unmistakable: the child was under his protection once more. At the care facility, Samuel Reynolds was grappling with a revelation that challenged the foundation of his brother's vendetta. If what you're saying is true, he said slowly, then Marcus has been blaming the wrong person all these years. Your brother needed someone to blame, Iron Jack acknowledged. I understand that. What I don't understand is why he's escalated to kidnapping my daughter, who's done nothing to anyone. Samuel closed his eyes briefly, his expression pained. After my injury, I was difficult, angry, shut everyone out, including Marcus. He was working 3 jobs trying to cover the costs insurance wouldn't. When I finally started talking again, it was mostly about Kalagush, about feeling abandoned out there. And Marcus took that anger as his own, Sarah Chin observed. He always was protective, Samuel agreed. too protective sometimes. But this, he shook his head, this isn't protection anymore. This is vengeance for its own sake. Your brother has explosives, Samuel, Sheriff Roberts said gravely. Military grade. They've already detonated one at Diana's diner. Thank God no one was inside. We have reason to believe they're planning more attacks. This news visibly shook Samuel. Marcus wouldn't, he couldn't. He's not the brother you knew, Lisa said gently. Just like Jack isn't the same man who commanded in Afghanistan. We all change, sometimes not for the better. Samuel studied Iron Jack's face, searching for something. Why are you here? Why not just send the police to arrest him? Because this isn't about justice anymore, Iron Jack replied honestly. It's about stopping the cycle before more people get hurt, including your brother. What do you want from me? Help us reach him, Lisa pleaded. He'll listen to you. He's done everything, built this entire conflict because he thinks it's what you would want. The truth of these words landed heavily on Samuel. For years he had nurtured his anger, focused it on the faceless colonel who had allegedly abandoned his men. He had never explicitly asked Marcus to seek revenge, but he had never discouraged it either. Take me to him, Samuel decided finally. But I need your word that he won't be harmed if this can be resolved peacefully. You have it, Sheriff Roberts promised. As they prepared to leave, Samuel fixed Iron Jack with an unreadable gaze. This doesn't make us even, Colonel. I never expected it would, Iron Jack replied. Some debts can't be repaid. Across town, the situation at the Morrison home had deteriorated further. Veterans Guard members had established a perimeter around the property but were unable to breach the Shadow Viper's defenses without risking Iron Jack's life. Inside, Havoc paced increasingly erratic circles, his plan unraveling as reports confirmed his brother's departure from the care facility. Find them, he shouted into his phone. I don't care how. Samuel cannot meet with Morrison. Do you understand? Diesel stood by the window, observing the Veterans Guard positions with professional assessment. It's over, Havoc, he said quietly. We're surrounded. The girl has probably broken my control over the dog by now. The Colonel's sister has your brother. There's no winning scenario here. It's not over until I say it's over, Havoc snarled, but the wild look in his eyes betrayed his recognition of the truth in Diesel's words. There's still a way out, Diesel suggested carefully. Release the Colonel. Return the girl unharmed. Face lesser charges. And sacrifice everything we've built. Everything I've done for Samuel? Havoc laughed bitterly. You don't understand, do you? This was never about the Shadow Vipers or territory or respect. This was about justice for my brother. Is this what Samuel would want? Iron Jack asked from his restraints. Terrorism? Kidnapping? Murdering a child's father in front of her? Before Havoc could respond, his phone rang again. The caller ID displayed a number he recognized instantly, Samuel's private line at the care facility. Samuel, he answered, his voice suddenly uncertain. Where are you? Are you safe? I'm safe, Marcus, came the reply, the familiar voice steadying despite the circumstances. But we need to talk. About Colonel Morrison. Or about what really happened in Afghanistan. Havoc's face drained of color as he listened to his brother's words. The narrative that had fueled his hatred for years was being dismantled by the very person whose suffering had inspired it. That can't be true, he protested weakly. He abandoned you, left you to die in that valley. He tried to save us, Marcus, against orders. I've spent 7 years blaming the wrong man. Samuel's voice broke slightly. And now I find you've taken his daughter. Become the very thing we both despise, someone who hurts innocent people. The revelation struck Havoc like a physical blow. His hand holding the phone trembled visibly as the foundation of his vengeance crumbled. What have I done? He whispered, more to himself than to his brother. Something that can still be fixed, Samuel responded firmly. But only if you end this now. Please, Marcus. No more violence. Not in my name." As these words penetrated Havoc's consciousness, the van carrying Peggy arrived at a predetermined rendezvous point, not the Shadow Viper's warehouse as planned, but an abandoned gas station on the outskirts of town. Waiting there was an unexpected, welcoming committee snake, accompanied by several Shadow Vipers who had clearly chosen to break with Havoc's increasingly destructive leadership. Grinder, Snake acknowledged tensely. Hand over the girl. "This has gone too far." Grinder hesitated, torn between conflicting loyalties. Havoc's orders. Havoc's lost it. Snake cut him off. "Kidnapping a kid? Explosives at a school? That's not what the Shadow Vipers stand for. That's not what we signed up for." The standoff might have escalated to violence if not for the sound of approaching motorcycles, not the expected backup from either faction, but Diesel arriving alone. His expression was grim as he dismounted, surveying the situation with a tactical eye. "It's over," he announced simply. "Havoc's talking to Samuel. The truth about Afghanistan is coming out." The first light of dawn found Riverstone transformed not by destruction as the Shadow Vipers had intended, but by the tentative emergence of reconciliation. Sheriff Roberts stood on the steps of the town hall, addressing the assembled press and anxious citizenry with the measured cadence of a man who had seen too much violence in his lifetime but never stopped believing in the possibility of peace. At approximately 2:17 this morning, Marcus Havoc Reynolds surrendered himself into custody, he announced, his weathered face betraying the exhaustion of the night's events. "All hostages have been recovered safely. The immediate threat to our community has ended." What the brief statement didn't capture was the raw emotion of the resolution, how Samuel Reynolds, wheeled into the Morrison home by Sarah Chin, had faced his brother across a divide far greater than physical distance. How Havoc, confronted with the truth about Afghanistan from the one person whose suffering had fueled his vendetta, had collapsed under the weight of realization. How Iron Jack, still bound to his chair, had watched silently as 7 years of misdirected hatred dissolved into anguished remorse. "I never wanted this," Samuel had told his brother, tears streaming down his face. "Never asked for vengeance, only for you to help me rebuild my life." In the end, it wasn't dramatic confrontation that diffused the crisis, but the simple power of truth spoken by a brother who loved even when he couldn't condone, but heard by a man who had lost his way but not his capacity for recognition. Peggy's reunion with her father came shortly after, orchestrated by Diesel and Snake, who had made the decision that would forever alter their standing within the Shadow Vipers. They arrived at the Morrison home with Peggy and Max, finding Iron Jack receiving medical attention for his injuries while Samuel spoke quietly with his brother in a corner guarded by Sheriff Roberts. "Dad." Peggy rushed to her father, Max limping determinedly at her side. Iron Jack enfolded her in an embrace that spoke volumes about the terror of their separation. "You're okay," he murmured into her hair, a statement that was partly question. "Max protected me," she replied simply. He remembered Mom's special command. Iron Jack looked up to find Diesel standing awkwardly in the doorway. Their eyes met across the room, former adversaries linked by a complex web of honor, betrayal, and ultimately choice. "Thank you," Iron Jack said quietly, "for bringing her home." Diesel nodded once, a soldier's acknowledgement. "Your wife trained her dogs well," he replied, his gaze shifting to Max. "And your daughter, she's something special." The legal aftermath unfolded with the methodical precision of a justice system accustomed to untangling human conflicts. Havoc faced multiple felony charges, including kidnapping, terrorism, arson, and conspiracy crimes that would ensure he spent decades in prison regardless of his eventual remorse. Other Shadow Vipers received sentences proportionate to their involvement, but with consideration given to those like Snake and Diesel who had ultimately chosen to break with Havoc's destructive path. 1 month after what Riverstone now simply called the incident, the rebuilding was well underway. Diana's Diner had reopened with a new counter and booths, but the same comfortable atmosphere that had made it a town landmark for decades. Tom Mason's hardware store was receiving its final coat of paint. The work done largely by volunteers, including several former Shadow Vipers who had severed ties with the organization following Havoc's arrest. Iron Jack's PTSD, exacerbated by the violence of that night, had initially worsened. For the first week after the confrontation, he barely slept, jumping at shadows and refusing to let Peggy out of his sight. It was Peggy who finally intervened, approaching her father with the direct honesty that characterized her unique perspective. "Dad," she said over breakfast one morning, "you're scaring yourself more than the bad men ever scared me." The observation, delivered without judgment, penetrated Iron Jack's anxiety in a way that professional counseling had not. That afternoon, he attended his first Veterans Affairs support group in years, accompanied by Max, whose own physical recovery mirrored his master's psychological healing. Most surprising to many in Riverstone was the unexpected development between Samuel Reynolds and the town's rehabilitation efforts. Samuel, who had spent years isolated in the care facility, requested transfer to Riverstone's smaller but more integrated assisted living center. His motivation became clear when he volunteered to help establish a recovery program for former Shadow Vipers seeking to reintegrate into society. "I understand what it's like to lose your identity," he explained to the skeptical town council. "To build your life around anger because it feels safer than facing loss. These men need what I needed: purpose, community, and the chance to define themselves by something other than their worst choices." The proposal faced significant opposition initially. Diana, whose diner had been destroyed, spoke for many when she questioned whether those who had terrorized the town deserved such consideration. "My family built that diner in 1962, she said, her voice tight with emotion. "My grandmother served pie to civil rights workers planning protests. My mother fed veterans returning from Vietnam when other places wouldn't. In one night, they took all that history from us. Why should we help them rebuild their lives when they were so willing to destroy ours?" It was Peggy who offered the response that ultimately swayed the room. Standing beside Samuel's wheelchair, her red hair pulled back in a neat ponytail, she addressed the council with a composure that belied her 9 years. "My mom trained dogs that other people thought were too aggressive," she began, her voice clear in the hushed chamber. She said, "Every dog deserves a second chance to learn a better way to be in the world. People are harder than dogs, but the principle is the same. The Shadow Vipers did bad things because they were trained by hurt and anger. Maybe they can be trained by something better now." 6 months after the confrontation, Riverstone hosted its first community integration fair, an event designed to showcase the rehabilitation program's progress and build bridges between former adversaries. In the town square, veterans and reformed Shadow Vipers worked side by side, staffing booths that offered everything from motorcycle maintenance workshops to employment resources for those with criminal records. Max, now fully recovered, demonstrated service dog protocols with Peggy, drawing a crowd of fascinated children and adults. The German Shepherd performed flawlessly, his intelligence and training evident in every precise response to Peggy's commands. What observers noted most, however, was the obvious bond between child and dog, a connection that transcended formal training to become something approaching partnership. "Your mother would be proud," Diana commented, bringing Peggy a lemonade during a break in the demonstrations. "Of both of you." Peggy considered this with her characteristic thoughtfulness. "I think she knows," she replied simply. "Max still does the things she taught him. So her training lives on." The fair culminated in a moment few in Riverstone could have imagined months earlier: Iron Jack and Samuel Reynolds sharing the small stage erected in the town square, addressing the community together about the costs of misunderstanding and the hard work of reconciliation. 7 years ago, in a valley in Afghanistan, circumstances beyond either of our control changed both our lives forever, Iron Jack began, his commander's voice carrying across the hushed crowd. The aftermath of that day poisoned relationships, communities, and possibilities, not because of what actually happened, but because of how pain and anger distorted our understanding of it. Samuel continued from his wheelchair, his powerful upper body framed by the afternoon sun. "My brother believed he was fighting for justice on my behalf. What he couldn't see, what I couldn't see for too long, was that vengeance isn't justice. It's just more pain spreading outward to touch innocent lives. 1 year to the day after Havoc first confronted Peggy at Mike's Gas and Go, Riverstone celebrated the official opening of the Catherine Thompson Canine Training Center, a facility dedicated to preparing service dogs for veterans, children with special needs, and first responders. The center, built with combined funding from the Veterans Guard, community donations, and a substantial anonymous contribution rumored to have come from DogsSavingLives, stood as a physical testament to transformation. Peggy cut the ribbon with Max sitting proudly beside her, his service dog vest bearing a new patch that identified him as the center's senior training consultant. Iron Jack watched from nearby, arm in arm with Lisa, whose relationship with Snake had weathered the crisis to emerge strengthened by shared purpose. Samuel Reynolds attended in his capacity as the center's outreach coordinator, his wheelchair pushed by a former Shadow Viper now employed as his personal assistant. Mom said something before she died, Peggy shared with the gathered crowd, her voice steady despite the emotion of the moment. She said that dogs understand something people often forget, that loyalty isn't about fighting for someone. Sometimes it's about showing them a better path. Max showed me that. I hope the dogs trained here will show others too. As the ceremony concluded and the community mingled in celebration, Sheriff Roberts found himself standing beside Diana, watching the unlikely tableau of former enemies engaged in relaxed conversation. "You ever think we'd see the day?" Diana asked, gesturing toward Iron Jack and Samuel, deep in discussion about the center's future programs. Roberts shook his head slowly, a smile creasing his weathered face. "Remind me never to underestimate the power of a determined 9-year-old and her dog." "Or the power of truth," Diana added softly. "Sometimes all it takes is one person brave enough to speak it when it matters most." In the fading afternoon light, Peggy and Max demonstrated one final training sequence, not a military protocol or service dog command, but a simple game of trust that Catherine had developed years ago. As the German Shepherd moved in perfect synchrony with the small girl, their shadows merged into a single silhouette against Riverstone's transformed landscape, a living reminder that even the deepest wounds can heal when bridged by understanding. And that courage sometimes wears the most unexpected faces. In the quiet corners of our memories lie the lessons that truly matter. 9-year-old girl bullied by bikers reminds us that courage knows no age and healing comes from unexpected places. Like Peggy and Max, we've all faced moments when the world seemed too harsh, when misunderstandings threatened to tear apart what we hold dear. Their journey echoes our own experiences of loss, misplaced blame, and the difficult path toward reconciliation. As we reflect on our lives, perhaps we recognize parts of ourselves in Iron Jack's struggle with past regrets, in Samuel's journey through bitterness to understanding, or in how a community united to rebuild what was broken. This story speaks to the resilience we've cultivated through decades of living, the wisdom to know that true strength isn't measured by intimidation but by the courage to extend compassion when it's hardest. The bonds that connect us to family, to community, to our past can either imprison us in cycles of vengeance or liberate us through forgiveness. Like Catherine's legacy living on through Max's loyalty, the values we cherish most endure when we pass them forward, transforming pain into purpose and conflict into healing. I hope you enjoyed today's story. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss more stories like this. Leave a like and comment below what you thought of the story. See you in the next video.